introduction. I think, we are all in that church of painful truth that we live every day, and it's probably good to come here and share the pain. So I'll let you to introduce yourself, but I want to connect the dots in terms of what Edna just talked about is the overall global supply chain and the value chain, right? Software and hardware. Where we got here, in addition to Edna, is Jyoti is actually doing phenomenal work on creating the software and DevSecOps, and she's a phenomenon now. And Wes, from what we know, is from from just not the Church of Painful Truth, but also actually taking the pain away, incident response and all, right? So our goal here in the next 20, 30 minutes we got is to explore that a little bit and share what you have from a global perspective to how can the creation and the recovery, response recovery can be done better, right? So Jyoti, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Val. Pleasure to meet you, Edna, and the whole team here. I'm Jyoti Charyulu, and I lead end-to-end application security for Fidelity Investments. And I truly believe I have two titles. One is called a Dream Protector, and second is a lifelong learner. And the reason I say Dream Protector is because I help protect dreams, somebody's retirement goal, somebody's planning for their child to go to college, or it could just be saving for going to that vacation they so badly deserve. I am responsible, and my team is responsible for protecting that. And it's a very important goal. And when we build software, I always like to go out and reach out to people and ask them, why are you doing this? When the why, if you see Simon Sinek, his books or his TED Talk, when the why becomes so important, the how, the what, the where, everything else falls in place. So that's my role, to go and be a part evangelist, also be a part of telling people we are in this together, and let's build it as seamlessly as you breathe in and you breathe out. I think that's what security is all about. It's not about, oh my God, these people have come back later, and as somebody mentioned, and Larry mentioned earlier today, come back late in the game just before you're deploying it. No, it is seamless. It's as you breathe in and as you breathe out, and the process of doing that.
Feel connected the yoga way, no?
Yes, that's right.
Wesley, how about your introduction?
Yes, my name is.
Should be okay now. It takes about 5
Here we
minutes.
go. I normally don't use a microphone. I'm an introvert by trade, but I can get my message out usually without these things. But I am a security evangelist. I do preach the gospel of security from the Church of the Painful Truth. And I'm gonna share a couple of things with you. Instead of talking a little bit about me and what I do, I'm gonna let you guys participate. How many of you believe that the election in 2016 was hacked? How many of you think it was just interference? I can tell you now, not a single voting machine was touched, and I can give you a 100% guarantee on that. What I can't do is tell you if the networks that built the machines and the companies that built the machines long before the voting machines you actually touched went online, if that was compromised. So when we talk a little bit about the value chain and you want a real world example, there's one right there. Next thing, who thinks the 2012 election was touched, or a 2014 election was touched? Who thinks that the electronic voting system has issues? Do you know how we got to this point? Actually, no. It happened in Florida during the Bush-Gore, because people couldn't figure out how to punch a button on a card. So the immediate knee-jerk reaction was, let's go electronic. Nobody thought about the implications of going electronic, about the security aspect of it, all the way down the value chain. If I didn't mention, I do get paid to scare you. I am a typical evangelist. I'm not Baptist, so you don't need to sit on the back row. But if you feel yourself in your anxiety level approaching, I'm doing my job. And I don't try to scare you into doing the right thing. I want to let you know that it is real. Those threats are real. I only deal in nation state. And I've got some stories that I really can't tell you.
So, this was a great thing to put us on the same panel because I'm here to tell you that even though it's scary, there are people working on the solution. Um, and, um, and I think we probably have the same clearance levels. So, but I think it's important to hear what was just said, which is seamless. Think about the why. You're not going to let anything stop you because you're thinking holistically. Holistic because you might think it was a bad actor, and the reality is the bad actor might be targeting somewhere deep down in the earlier part of the value chain that you might not have thought of. So what I'd like to do is, Val, if we could, talk about what we can come together on as identifying fundamental threats. And so for me, those threats are three. There are only three. They're big and they're hairy and they're audacious, but there are only three. And they're manipulation, espionage at both the nation state and industrial level, as well as disruption. And then if you break that down, if you're a security person, that means something to you. Everybody's nodding if you're a security person. If you're not, the reality for the rest of the world is what you should be thinking about is the risk of a tainted solution, so the impacts, four, right? Four impacts, three threats, four impacts. A tainted solution, whether hardware, software, service, or cloud offer. A counterfeit solution, which is very different kind of threat. Those people are looking for quick in and out money, not a nation state actor, but nonetheless a threat. And that could be at a raw material level or a finished good level, not just hardware. A rogue code module that you're going to clean out because you're thinking holistically, right? So taint, counterfeit, misuse of intellectual property. Why? Well, two reasons. One, if you're a for-profit company, and even if you're a not-for-profit company, your intellectual property allows you to generate money to actually do what you do for your shareholders or your constituents. So you want to protect it for that reason. But if IP gets out, it allows those who would do harm to do it far more swiftly and cost efficiently. And then finally, I want to think about information security breach along that continuum of the value chain, to your point, because those third parties, I may be fabulous. If I look at my CISO, he's going to tell me we're regularly fabulous. And I'm going to say that's fantastic, but that only protects Cisco. What about the third-party ecosystem? Their breach might give rise to my poor hygiene on their part, to my confidential information being disclosed. And I love to learn what my colleagues think.
You're spot on. You're spot on. And if you think about it, anything is if you track it back, it is a piece of code that could be behind. And development teams want to do the right thing. It's not that they're sitting out there saying, oh, I don't want to do the right thing. They all want to do the right thing. It's just not that they're aware of how. And when you get down to the trenches, so for example, if you take a look, I don't want to get too technical, but cross-site scripting is one of the, the OWASP top 10, the topmost flaw that's used. In one of the presentations, if I show that, okay, here's your web application firewall, I'm throwing a number out there, it's not true, but 1,600 distinct IP addresses using cross-site scripting in the last 1 hour, and that is targeting your code developer. Do you get it? Okay, by the way, you can take a cross-site scripting training hands-on with Fidelity's code right now. That would have a better impact for that developer saying, absolutely, it's 1,600, and what? The line of code I'm developing is prone to so much risk? Yes, I get it. So it's a lot of driving the right behavior. And when I say seamless, if you automate it, when you're code developing, when you're building your code with Jenkins or any other software, if you automatically test it with different static analysis tools or dynamic tools, and it fails, it's again seamless to the point where you're going behind, where you're kind of like pulling it from the back, and then putting the picture of them in that face of if a breach were to happen, it's because of that one line of code or how you configure or misconfigured an authorization or authentication, whether on-prem or cloud. They get it. They get that. So I think that's very important from an awareness and why perspective.
So Jyoti, I think, you have been you have been working on DevSecOps, just the whole agile methodology. When the
Absolutely.
speed of creation increases, and I'm not going to the creator creation, but I think the creation of the code
Yes.
and the software, uh, where do you think, some of that is automation, some of that is training, but where do you think is the effectiveness of someone constantly guiding them through that process? Because that's constant, like the agile process specifically,
True.
security didn't embrace agile for a long time. Now we have started doing that.
Yes, yes,
What's your
absolutely.
opinion on that?
So in that, again, you could say you have cloud deployments that happen, once an hour or 10 times an hour or 50 times an hour.
Yeah.
They're deploying. You have development that's no longer waterfall that you wait for 18 months for fruition. It's 2 weeks. So again, at this point, the awareness comes into play that you scan early, you scan often, but you scan really early. If you have an agile, you know your sprint is coming up, and that's where, and then you have automation again. Like, we constantly ping the static analysis tool. We cannot allow disruption. We cannot allow disruption even for a 1 hour or one few minutes. So that's where the pinging and the automation happens, so that we know the service, and that's built again into the contracts with the SLA, so that you can make sure you have 99.99% uptime, not a 93%, because 7% you have major going live, and be like, sorry, the 7% fell in that. It's like you go to a doctor and you say, my knee is hurting. It's like, oh, that was multiple choice question. Sorry, I skipped that. It doesn't work that way. So I think, again, from automation, that's how you build it in, where you allow the developers the tools by automating the scanning process, automating of the release and deployment process, and again, the testing process as well. So we have something called pre-release assessment, which used to be a manual process based on policy, that no high-risk application can go deploy to cloud or on-prem. But then we've deployed, again, automations where it passes the policy based on OWASP top 10 flaws, and that happens when they develop the code. So not at the time when they're releasing the code, but when they're developing it, it's built in, and when they're building the code, it's passing policy, and then it goes ahead straight into CD part.
Okay. So that's the sausage making of software making, right? And
Yes.
I'll come to you in one moment. But I want to hear, Wesley, your thought about while this while this whole speedy, and agile code development is happening. Where do you think are the vulnerabilities in terms of what you see, where the attack surfaces and what the threats are, and where is the bad actor going to come in here?
So to back it up a second, when we develop software, we deploy software, and we're waiting on the patches to come out. We heard from Larry earlier saying IT folks and developers want to get it out. Today, the cost of doing business does include security and automating all of your updates and all of your patches, and they go out. As a bad guy, I no longer need to R&D your OS. I need to no longer R&D your firmware because I'm going after your patches. Why do I want to spend the time, money, and resources that I don't have when I can get a better return on investment by waiting for you to release the patch? Because your patch is going to tell me what the problems are.
Right. So it's not any Tuesday anymore, right? It's not a
That's-
patch Tuesday anymore. Now you get it at any time, any cycle.
Most companies still rely on that Microsoft baseline of Patch Tuesday, so IT departments can schedule their normal update cycles. You're not going to push patches and updates out to critical servers without testing it first. At least you shouldn't. At IBM, we got a couple of employees around the globe, and our policy in-house is strictly your laptops, your desktops, they automatically update via vendor patches when they come out. We went from weeks and months down to hours. And what we call that's a patient zero. We don't give the bad guys time to read the patches that are put out. We work with Cisco, we work with other partners, even though we're competitors. Behind the scenes, we're also partners. And we share a lot of that security information to make sure, hey, this is what we see, this is what's coming out. Let's make sure we get all this stuff working in concert with each other.
Right, right.
Completely agree.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree. Second that, it's like looking at, you don't wait for a month to look at the report and go back and patch, or a day or a specific day. It's happening constantly.
Right.
And of course, there's also only so much you can do. I mean, you do have the ability to go and try, but then at the same time, it's like securing your house. You secure everything, but what if the teenage daughter keeps opening the garage door and or the front door and just walking and keeping it unlocked, right? You're trying to secure everything, but it's you never know what's being from a user error, the internal user error, or from the patch updates for a specific security software.
So that's software. Edna, we got hardware. How do you, how do you put it together now?
Do you want to take?
So I think you have to think about it holistically, and I think you have to think about it in a layered approach, right? So let's use what Jyoti had just said, which was interesting, which is think about your house. So you lock the front door, you might have an alarm system, you might have a weapon, you might have a passcode for your garage, you might have a set of layers that you have to go through. And there is a potential that all layers will ultimately be breached. And that's why we say you want to detect. Well, first you want to protect, then you want to detect, but you also need to be prepared to live in the real world and mitigate. And to the extent you do things more swiftly, it gives you an opportunity to mitigate. But an example of holistic thinking might be something like the hardware and the software, the architecture ought to be united and validate with one another. So in a perfect world, you would have secure boot, and your device just wouldn't boot if somebody had altered the hardware, because at the architectural firmware level, it's saying, I'm going to go do a check. And so we're on our 4th generation of anti-counterfeit technology, and that anti-counterfeit technology is actually, we imbue immutable identity keys as the chip is being put onto the printed circuit board assembly, and it's going to check real time every time it's booted. And there's an opportunity to actually help collectively the aspects of information and communication technology to say, we have a problem, I have a flag, and that's when you use things like network segmentation, or in an industrial control environment, separation, right? Not necessarily air-gapped, but make sure you have separation of your industrial controls, so if a plant goes down, the entire plant doesn't go down, a portion of the plant goes down. So it's that way of thinking. And then I think you work with your third-party ecosystem. So a glaring example is, how many of the room know what an FPGA is, if I say that? FPGA? Okay, well, so great. The Motorola and Cisco people know what it is. You know what an FPGA is? No? Okay. So I've worked to
I
give a...
may know what it is if I've heard the word.
It's
Even
a
if you heard
field,
the word, it's
field programmable gate array.
The electrical engineers know that.
It's a type of component that goes on a printed circuit board. So let's go back for a minute. Step 1. The heartbeat of any digital device is the printed circuit board. The brain, this is Edna view, it's not in the textbook, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. The brain of that printed circuit board is the integrated circuit, okay? A field programmable gate array is a type of component that, now listen to the first 2 words, field programmable. Customers love it. It gives flexibility, it gives variability. To me, it's a neon sign that says, you know, for those of you who ever watched, what's the show where Vanna White was on? What is that?
Wheel of Fortune.
Wheel of Fortune, right? She would do this with the letters. That's to me a neon sign that says, enter here, enter here. In case you didn't know where to enter here. So what we did was we put flash IC, so secure boot on the flash IC of any FPGA that we put in our products is a fundamental. And we worked with the third-party ecosystem to do that, right? And another example of collaboration is I worked with, I don't know if you know Andras Sakal, he's your CTO of your Federal Systems Group. Andras and I co-chaired a standard that was 7 years in the making and is now ISO 20243, that is a standard on how do you identify a trusted provider of information and communications technology. Now just think about that. You didn't hear the word security, and you didn't hear a thing, you heard a trusted provider. What are the holistic steps that they do in order to actually make them the person you'd buy the refrigerator from as opposed to someone else?
And I also want to add, look at the whole product, not, again, like if you go to a doctor and say, like, no, I missed that in, optional question, or, you need to go to this specialist, or you need to go to that specialist. Ultimately, it's one body that, you can't go to 100 different specialists, right? So if you look at holistically, the same thing like a, house or a body, the firm. So you have threat modeling, you have pen testing, you have different aspects of testing that can bring out, and again, from a risk-based framework, it always has to be tied in back to the risk. You have a different kind of, you can't boil the ocean. You cannot take each and every application or hardware out there, which is again a risky, that can be another debate altogether.
Yep.
Right, I mean, how do you create that realm and layered of security? Because if you say, it's a cafeteria menu, I don't need to put a barcode scan on that. But if that uses the same user IDs and passwords or credentials, or if it's open with no network segmentation, that could be used to get in. So, but at the same time, if you use threat modeling or you use different kinds of pen testing, you use AWS from infrastructure testing as well as the code testing. So to come back and understand what are your top flaws or top issues that you need to from a holistic perspective, not specifically with this particular line of code. I think
See,
that's important.
sometimes, Jyoti, I think you brought about, and between Edna, you and the two of you talked about, one is the trusted part,
Uh-huh.
right? And then there is to maintain the veracity of the trust, right, or the integrity of the process, right? These are the two things. And then there is this human factor that is out there. I want to probably dig deeper a little bit into the whole open source ecosystem, right? There is
Absolutely.
third party and of supply chain, and then there is whole movement now of using open source. So what are your thoughts on it? And I want to quickly go around.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, so we have an open source program that security is just a small part of, but even from a code, from, again, you have to go from, here's a policy, here's a standard, so that people need to know what it's been. So that's first thing, you come up with a policy and a standard from an architecture perspective, what's allowed, etc. The implementation of that can be done from, even if you want to go out and take out a piece of code or library which would help you save time, there's a process that you do that at the ground level. But at the same time, from a scanning perspective, there are different tools, even this freeware like OWASP dependency checker. It comes with a dashboard, super clean, and that's, again, you can automate that, you can integrate that with your Jenkins build. That's one way of scan early and scan often. And there are some like source clear, I don't use vendors' names, but there are out there that can record open source flaws and failure policy, which is very important that we should be doing, and we do at Fidelity. So I think that's the key of understanding, again, the awareness, and there has to be a standard, because there should always be something that goes back and tells the developer, here's what it is and here's how it is. And it has to go from education, evangelizing, all the way down, top down and bottom up. And then reporting and metrics, I think that's key. When we fail an application that utilizes an open source flaw, um, they have to have an exception process to even go release to production because there is an open source flaw. And it's just actually very simple. It's a matter of using another library without that vulnerability. But that awareness and the policy behind it, and as well as the metrics and dashboards that show, and many times it's a healthy competition in my world. I go to one business unit and I just report, hey, business unit A and business unit B, here's your report, and they get super competitive, and then my job is done.
Yeah, yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
it's a lot of it's a combination of everything, like policy, executive training, development training, reporting policies, and again making sure that there are exceptions built in so that we don't allow, we are aware of it, and even then we do our best, but we worry about what is it we are not catching.
Mhm.
Even with this, like we can only do what's recorded in the database, right, in the NV. But what are the other ones that are out there that are not yet reported from a third party?
Great, great. So, no, thank you.
What I really like about open source and the open source movement is it allows anybody to see the code. It allows everybody to troubleshoot the code. It allows open eyes to touch something and it's not hidden. And I won't pick on Microsoft, but there's a company that doesn't always give their code away. and you don't know what bugs are in what you're looking at. And that is starting to remove that. Now it's also a double-edged sword. You could be overwhelmed by the number of people. So if you got a thin skin, don't code nothing in open source, because people are going to pick it apart because they're naturally curious. Well, they should be naturally curious, especially using open source. That brings that whole supply chain and that whole value chain, that allows other people to not only get in, but it allows you to learn, oh, I didn't code this exactly correctly. If you don't have the ability to buy commercial products that do your source code testing, you're going to have an entire community behind you, and they're going to give stuff away. I mean, GitHub is a major supporter of that as well. You can get anything you need. You don't have to recreate the wheel. There's a million wheels on GitHub you can download and put in your own code.
Right. No, I see the two perspectives, and I think the between the open and the closed, again, the holistic wins, right? You have to have a holistic approach. You cannot impede the pace with which innovation is going. Disruption, of course, will continue on. In fact, we are looking at it in a different way this time, like this, from a CFF lens, like this, we have been in the disruptive innovation phase for quite some time, and I think with all the lessons learned in the last 3, 5, 10 years that we have been, kind of being disrupted, I think we need to look at strategic innovation, and the disruption be part of that strategy, right? We cannot get disrupted every time. We will have to take it that change is constant, and we'll have to embrace open source. We have to embrace the controls around open source and secure the entire value chain.
And I also want to add that if you to this mix that you just mentioned, if you add APIs, if you add cloud deployments, on-prem deployments, it's just and microsites, microservices.
Yep.
It's a very complicated world, and that's what adds the complexity. So my suggestion is just try to keep it simple. Literally break it down and keep it simple, but address the risks as well from a risk-based framework.
Closing thoughts?
Um, I think at the end of the day, people want to do the right thing, and they just don't know how, or they don't have the time to do so. So I think it's very important for our generation to tell everyone else that we are in this spot, and let's keep the why very important. Always talk about the why, and try to automate as much as possible. When we automate as much as possible, it makes it easier for them, because that way they do the right thing, and it's also helping them seamlessly, guiding them to do the right thing.
The why and the automation. Edna, your closing thoughts.
So, a couple of things. One, identify the who in your ecosystem is doing what. Clarify what your threats are and the impacts of those threats, and develop a flexible, risk-based architecture that allows you to address those risks and impacts in the right way with each of them, because not all of them are equally risky. And then I think you need to innovate always with the life cycle in mind, not just a moment in time. And then finally, I think you need to collaborate, but collaborate radically. And I use that word intentionally. Radically collaborate with other members of industry, with academia, and with government, because only by doing that together will we actually succeed.
Radically collaborate. That's right. Final closing thoughts, Wesley.
I've got the choice of one of two, and I'm going to leave you with, as security professionals, we've always been the power of no, N-O. What we need to be is the power of no, K-N-O-W. So when your security gets in the way of your value chain, when security becomes the problem, you're doing one of the two incorrectly, either your business and your value chain or your security.
Power of no. So this is a powerful panel. Thank you. Thank you all. Fantastic work.